May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Happy New Year! It's year C, Luke. Last Friday morning, upon returning from yet another forced walk upon the Schnauzer with the cousins, my oldest grandchild came up to me and announced that she had some really amazing and special news. I asked what that was, and the reply was, you know the water that comes down the drain pipe? Well, when I looked at it just now, it was frozen. That means that Christmas is coming. Well, that's just one way, right, of looking at approaching Advent, especially if you're 6. Not to mention, it certainly lacks the apocalyptic tone of today's reading in Luke. Which brings us to the question of why was Luke so dire? And beyond that, why did the church in its wisdom choose this particular reading to send us off to prepare for the birth of Christ? Because 4 weeks from now, and at every Christmas Eve service, we will hear Luke again, and it is full of wonderful and warm images of a baby in a manger, and angels singing on high, and shepherds hurrying, and Mary pondering. And with all of that, why do we start off with this distressing reading? Maybe, just maybe, it is because the point of Christmas is not to begin and end with the birth of the babe, but rather to point us toward the anticipation of the second coming. Every year, I think the same thing, that we have started this whole rush to all things Christmas way too early and way too commercially. But this year, I really think things went a bit too far. It was the announcing of Black Friday specials on days that weren't even Friday, such as the day after Halloween, and then every day thereafter that really started to bother me. It seemed as though we were trying to make up for the lost shopping season of 2020, and the only way we could truly celebrate the birth of Christ in 2021 was to shop early, often, and until we drop. And then I got to thinking, what if all of this rush to all things Christmas is our way of trying to take our minds off all of the things that are really messed up and honestly awful in the world that surrounds us? Everything from forest fires to damaging weather events to climate change to civil unrest to poverty to political upheaval to migrants and refugees to inflation and COVID, and now the Omicron variant. Which all brings me back in a wonderfully circular way to the reading for this morning. Because the way this reading starts out is pretty much the way I feel some mornings and noons and evenings. While today's lesson reminds us that we are to focus on Christ beyond Christmas, it also reminds us that we are to focus beyond the mess and the confusion. Or in the words of theologian David Lose, what we are all experiencing is fear. And today's lesson, Beyond the Opening, is about looking forward with faith to overcome that fear. The lesson continues with a parable about a fig tree. Well, all trees, well, really all of nature. And Jesus reminds his disciples and us that even though we see trees seemingly to die, shedding their leaves, going dormant for the winter, we know that soon we will see the branches begin to bud and then leaf out, and we know that once again we will have shade and fruit and abundance. Have faith. Remember that despite the lean look of winter, the spring brings renewal of growth. And it is not enough to remember the fig tree. Jesus reminds us that we are not to be weighted down or overcome by the strife and stress that surrounds us. We are to stay alert, be prepared. We are to pray at all times for the courage to stand up and raise our heads. Los goes on to say, it is not our job to save the whole wide world, but it is our job to care for those in the little corner of the world that we happen to inhabit. It is our job, that is, to offer that little corner of the world an alternative to the fear that so corrodes the world. So after parsing the somewhat dire and distressing, yet bearing hope and promise message, and the instruction to offer an alternative, where do we, as a faith community from here on this first Sunday of Advent, start out? Perhaps we could begin by looking back to August and the fear we witnessed that our allies in Afghanistan must have felt and still must feel in the hurried way they left their homes and all things familiar in their lives to save their lives and the lives of their family. How must they feel as they await the bureaucratic efforts of processing in order to settle in this new country? Where might they reroute themselves, and where will be the place that welcomes them and their family to a new normal? And if it is, as David Lowe says, our job to care for those in that little corner of the world we inhabit, what might we, as a faith community, as Christians, as Episcopalians in Minnesota, be called by the Spirit to do? The Commission for the Diaconate and all Episcopal Church deacons, along with Bishop Loya, are inviting this morning all faith communities within the ECMN to take part in Advent for Afghans, welcoming our newest neighbors. During the 4 Sundays of Advent, we will be raising awareness across the state for our Afghan allies that have made their way to safety in the United States and here in Minnesota. We will be joining our efforts with Episcopal Migration Ministries and their local partner here in the Twin Cities, the Minnesota Council of Churches, to achieve this goal. And in the coming weeks and days, I will give you information concerning everything you need to know about the obligations a faith community needs to meet in order to co-sponsor an Afghan family. Some of the many ways each of us can be part of welcoming our newest neighbors. While there are so many different ways for individuals and faith communities to walk with our new neighbors, the most essential is prayer. And so this morning at the Advent wreath, we said the first of 4 prayers that we will say with the whole of the ECMN family that were written for our Afghan allies, as well as God's blessing on our efforts. On the 3rd Sunday of Advent, well, all of those are blue, but on the Pink Candle Sunday, in addition to our prayer, we as deacons are asking that each faith community dedicate the loose offering in the collection plate to the Minnesota Council of Churches Refugee Resettlement Program. As our presiding Bishop Michael Curry reminds us, the ministry of offering welcome to those fleeing violence is nothing less than God's work, one that calls us to walk the way of love, as Jesus of Nazareth taught us, through compassion, through practical care, showing to our newest neighbors that we are neighbors. Because this year I am the convener for the Commission for the Diaconate, I kind of had a heads up on this one. I kind of helped put it together. And because other folks here at St. Paul's have also been listening to the Spirit, we have brought this project to and have been approved by the vestry. And our energy has been matched and joined with the energy at St. John Linden Hills and their deacon Rex McKee, and together Rex McKee and I have approached St. Luke's St. James and their deacon Morris Goodwin to join us all in a partnership that shares our resources of time and talent. And so this morning, I am asking that each of us first and foremost pray for these, our newest neighbors, as they begin to navigate their new home. And I am asking each of us to prayerfully discern if there are talents and time that we could give in welcome. This is what makes the beginning of today's lesson one to embrace rather than to be feared. This is what we can do to answer Jesus' call not to be weighed down by the worries of life, but rather to stay alert, to pray, and to remember that the babe in the manger is only the beginning. Amen.